Okie dokie. Hello, everybody. This is Azrin here, joined again with Blaise and Kolton. How are you guys doing? Good?
Uh,
Good, good.
Look after you.
So today, I'm not going to be in this podcast very much. In fact, I won't be in it really at all. It'll be just Blaise and Kolton. And we thought, wouldn't it be a great idea to do a podcast, Blackfoot podcast, in Blackfoot, where both, well, you guys and also Kolton and Blaise can get to know everybody. So we've prepared some interesting get to know you questions. And then Kolton and Blaise are going to discuss them in Blackfoot. And so, yeah, without further ado, I'll read some of the questions. Well, I guess you guys can read the questions out, eh? I mean, when you ask it, people will know. They'll hear what the question is. So, yes, without further ado, I guess I'll pass it off to you guys.
the only thing about the questions is they're really hard to translate. Before we started recording, we were talking about how kind of differences between Blackfoot and English and just how you think about words and how you consider the sentences. And so I don't believe I mentioned this in the last podcast. I might have a little bit, but it's really hard to translate from English sometimes because a lot of words just don't really exist. You have to think of another way to talk about them. So maybe we could read them in English and then we'll answer in Blackfoot.
Sure, it's fine by me. If it's fine with Blaise and fine with you, Kolton, then yeah.
It's the first one. If you could instantly become an expert in any field, what field would you choose? Okay, so let's see that nakanista sokinaki. Nitsiksta nakaputak itas sokinakyopa. Again.
Kenimi anni so itikakyo sato matapiks the na matapiks nita komitipa how they behave na eight
Anya. Kiname matstik. What is the most adventurous thing you've ever done or would like to do in life? Aknesto. Most adventurous. Matskini. Nitiksta naksi to climb. Naksi tapochpa. Ninnash to climb up. I'd like to climb up a mountain. I'd like to climb mountains. Naksi to climb. Shooters. Nakamiskapis. Mistakis. To drag myself up mountains. I probably couldn't climb it. Drag myself. Nakamiskapis. Mistakis.
Last year, nitok koi skill ka na gayo. Stunatsi Skunadaps.
Ikstonadaps nakakyayo. Said he wants to fight a bear. Jokes.
I did fight a bear.
Ksitska omksikyayo. If you could have a conversation with any historical figure. Oh, this one would kind of be easy. Kamukot sitsip sataniki akatapyo. Taka ktak sitsip sata kitsan stapi Kidak supporti seta. That's how you translate that. Well, historical figure, I just said like an old person. Like a historic person. And tak sit seta. It's gonna say that tak sit seta si that's me. Probably a backchikonista. Synonym a backchikonista. Sakquina. There is a term for there's a traditional term for chief, but I don't really remember it. Sakquina. He was the last chief of the Blackfeet. The last kind of he wasn't the last one, but he was kind of the last old timer. Sakta Ninukata I would also talk to Naka Sikamo Mahkan Naachsa Sikamo Mahkan Ninna. My oh, do you think we should translate in English?
Maybe we could put that to Azrin, but hopefully na Mixokoex Ika Kimat.
Aika Kimat can make Rakutista beat Nitawan Nishpin, and you'll understand what we're saying. But what I said was I would talk to Naachsa Sikamo Mahkan. I would talk to my grandfather, Chief Running Crane, also. But if not him, then I'd also speak with a Bakshkonist chief, White Calf. Gun.
Si pska na isa po mohkika ki tatsikista.
Han.
Nitux ka na itapitapikoex. What I said is that I would like to speak to is the forefather of like the First Nations of the Blackfoot here in Canada, Chief Crowfoot, and kind of like a modern version of forefather Narcissus Blood.
Again, if you had the ability to time travel, this is why I can't really translate all time travel.
Wait. Wait.
May sama boxen.
Sama boxen. Ika
time travel. Wow. The way that I would think about it is to be able to time travel.
Anya. Going back in time.
Oh yeah, to go forward in that.
We just created a Blackfoot word of the day.
Go back and forth. Again, would you go to past to the future? I don't know. What area or time period would you visit? I guess you could say that. Takita po iskohtik. Nakoksuatach sa kita peaks ki hakata peaks. I just said I would go to the past so that I could visit the old people and the ancient people.
Nitakita po ikaksapi o ikaksapi.
Long time ago.
Would like to visit. I would like to go back in time to visit the old people of Japan.
Ikaksapi. What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself in the past year? Keep trying to say this year. What did I learn about myself? I don't know. I don't learn jokes. Gusto nomaka. Kiraki to me, boy. Talk first. Nitsksanit. Nitskanamatsuko. Nitsi snack ones. I learned that I have Cree blood. That's the most.
Anya. Tansei.
Tansei.
Tansei. Namoya na daw maka.
Tansei.
Iksi poet. Na nisto nitpo ko biem nitpo ko biem na Inesti. I would like to live in peace.
Stoi. Han. If you could choose any animal to be your spirit companion, what animal would you choose and why? Tanistapi. Big C. I guess you could say Tanistapi. Chawapamaka. What animal would I choose? Hey, what spirit animal?
It's Storky.
Yeah. Nitoaki. Aniskin. Deksan. Chicken I think. What animal? Ito.
Second is text semester. Ito.
Tanistapi Grakoshikata. Which one are you going to choose? Tanistapsi Grakoshikata. Gusto nito'y Ito. Han.
Gusto Makoy.
Makoy. Sukapi Makoy.
Sopo na Makoy. Sopo kstawa si. Na Makoy sa ichidesk sinimasta kyo itapitapio.
Tapitapio. Hanya. Well, let me change mine. Kinisto. Takosishkata. Sinopao. Kit fuck. Sinopao. Takotoshkata. Sinopao. Tsitsins. Sinopah kanakatsi. Choose the kit fox because of the I joined the Kit Fox Society. Sinobawa Han.
Sunobong. Gay too. Kika. Oh, we didn't even get this one yet. Or are we saving the last question? Or hero, movie, or actually no.
Oh, we did miss it.
Yeah.
Oh, we also missed. What are you gonna ask them? It's gonna see that si seta na si kamo mahkan. Kita is bishboa. I'd ask them about how they lived.
No.
Bishboa. Han. Ken ka Tanis tapi kits token ako mi chipa. What's your favorite fictional world? How would you say that? Bisatsi sksak. A fancy world. Bakti. Fiction. Sanituanyo fiction or something made up.
No, kika. Ixka sit. Ixka. Wait, no. Kika. Nimax to ni fiction.
Upstick ako. A phony world.
Phony world.
I don't know. Fiction, that is kind of a hard one. We don't really have a concept of a mistaken world.
No. Itatapi po pretend.
Oh, pretend. Could be.
Ikipa. Pretend.
Oh, tsakta snakyatis access as access toxin tsakta video game. Yeah. Tsakta as access taxin. As access maybe as access taxin. Like a TV show game, or you could also say bisatsi khtsin, like a fancy game. Bisatsi khtsin. Han. My favorite. Tsukanesti tak. Netsis tokana komiti pa. Nishkai ikhtsin anistai The Legend of Zelda.
Hanya.
Han.
Misto ni tiksi kyo wa bi
Kyo.
mata beaks Attack on Titans.
Oh yeah, how would you say? Kita peaks, tall big people maybe. Kita peaks. Chikyo
Spito
kita peaks. Or maybe even kita peaks. Kita peaks. High up tall people, high up big people. Kita peaks. Han. Attack on Titan. We also say makes it kita peaks. Exekyo weight B. Not sure if you could use that. Exekyo weight B means to attack something, to say they're attacked.
No,
you could say exekyo weight B wakes Nixie kita peaks. They're attacking those high up big people. Han.
No, gano. Iksikyowa beat.
Iksikyowa beat. Iksikyowa beat, maybe. They're attacked. Kenokay. One skill or hobby that you always wanted to learn but haven't had the chance to. Nistoa, nistoa. Nitsiksta nakkawa kataksi. Nitsiksta nakkasksinamatsukurs. Nakkawa kataksi. Iskinyaut. Yeah. Skinyaut. Ayak skinny. I don't even know what that is. Iskinyaut. I don't know why I said that. I don't even know what that means. Skinyaut. Ayak skinny. I want to learn how to play the violin. Ayak skinny.
Nistoa nita sapat. Gayo. I would like to track bears.
Grak sapata gayo. Gayo x. Han. Ay ston na taps.
Stomatops.
Exactly.
Stoa go. No, I better not say that one. I was gonna say I am called Dangerous.
Yeah.
My middle name is Dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sad.
Okay. Stoa kamukte kamukot doch. Yeah. This is gonna be a tongue twister. Kamukot doch otak soyiniki. If you could dine with Nioxgatapi. Kamukot otak soyiniki Nioxgatapi. Sakyatapi tsakta eat or eat. Yeah, how'd you say eat neeks? Dead. Taka Krakutaks Krakpotaks soypa. Dying with. Sikanestitak Nakok. Have you ever heard that word? Otak soy to have dinner. Otak soy is to have dinner.
Otak soy. Otak soy.
Yeah.
Nita otak soy na
Kidak pokotak soyim. You're going to eat dinner with. Kidak pokotak soyim. Okay, let's do 3 people. Gee, I don't know. With 3 people. Takpokotak soyim wow. Geez, I haven't had to answer questions like this in a long time.
Nistoa nitak soyit isa pomohkikaw sistikong nina ki success ki sis charcoal.
Okay, nisto. Takpok. Ditsiksta nakpok otak soyim wow. I want to eat dinner with. Nenas tako. Mountain chief. Ki. Taka. Napi.
Yeah.
Ki. Susie.
See, Susie.
Big Susie. Kitskinoa. Do you know her? Have you heard of her? Big Susie?
Susie.
Susie. Otaksistoyaki. Oki eitsipuyo. Itapio Iskortik. She lived a long time ago. Not that long ago, but she's a Hutterite woman that spoke Blackfoot. Can't believe you've never heard of her. My favorite kind of joking phrase, awan ni kitsin namin noon comes from an old person. I was told that he always used to joke about her. Kiawan niya, no waka na ko Susie. He'd always say, no waka na ko Susie. Watch out, here comes Big Susie. That's who I dine with. Nina stako na bi ki big Susie. Gan.
Anya. What is the most important life lesson you've learned from difficult experience? Gusto.
Yeah. Sanistapi gets cinnamon suku i. Well, I know that how you might say that. You could probably say Sanistapi gets cinematsok iikoy. What has difficulty taught you? It's cinematsok. I don't learn.
Napi to skapi gani.
Yo. Honest napi. What have I learned? I don't know. I learned. Gusto ko. It's gonna see that Knitskamatsu. Yeah. I can't think. Naksitama best. Have fun. Don't take things too serious.
Hanya.
Fun.
Gusto. Eat too.
Me too. Gusto.
No. Each desk cinema stuff your access scan viewer. He tapit the viewer.
Those are our questions. Now you guys know who we are.
My favorite superhero, if you guys can break it down. Aga pipiksina. Aga pipiksina. She
say it down here? Is that how you say it down there? Up here we say Makapipitana.
Makapipitana. Na. Makapipiksina.
Hanya.
What I said is, I like Batman. Or Bat.
Makapipi does how we say bad down here. It's a bad eagle, essentially. And then I think up there, it's just bad bird.
Yeah, we say sticky bird.
Oh, sticky?
Sticky bird.
Oxpipiksina. Bird man. Yeah. Tanisi samay poyop.
Tanisi steak poyop.
Tanisi samay poyop. How long have we been talking? Not that long.
No, ni Max tonight. Ne kopoto. Ne kopoto.
16 minutes.
Hmm.
Ne kuputoisksenetaksen 8 boyop. Hanya. That's all for today then. Jokes. Well, that was kind of our warm-up in Blackfoot. Even though we both kind of fumbled some questions. I think it's more so just, so I'm not really used to talking about topics like that in Blackfeet. It's kind of really difficult for me. Talk about my books and whatnot, but a box, and we could talk about high Blackfoot. What do you think? Sukapi. I'll start first with whatever is. I learned Akapoksin is what we used to speak some 100 years ago, and there's still people that know it today. But what people speak mostly today is modern Blackfoot, and high Blackfoot is kind of the way that I think of it. It was Blackfoot without any kind of really any influence from English. It's one thing that you really people really kind of forget is really how fundamentally different English and Blackfoot are. And what I mean by that is Blackfoot, all of our language is verbs. And so we traditionally, or the way that it was, is there's really very few nouns. And so everything was verbs. And I remember the first time that I kind of saw a difference between older Blackfoot and newer Blackfoot is like if somebody to say something simple, like I remember heard two different women saying, they gave me the example of how to say like, I am a woman. And then the modern Blackfoot is more similar to how you'd say it in English, whereas an old Blackfoot, it's completely different. You know, in modern Blackfoot, if you to say you were a woman, you'd say, Anisto aki, which, you know, you could basically translate word for word from English. But if you were to say it from in old Blackfoot, you'd just say nita ki. But the thing about that is you're saying it in the way that you would conjugate for a sentence, a verb sentence. Nita ki. And so that makes it so that akeo isn't really a noun. It's not really a noun for a woman. It's really more of a verb for like to be a woman. So that's why you could say akeo, she is a woman, or that's woman, or stuff like that. But I think we kind of lost that, the way that we really view language when we started to all speak English. So I think that we started to translate our ideas from English. And the reason that I think that is, you know, examples like that, but another example that came to mind was colors, because the way that we view colors in Blackfoot is different than the way that we do in English. And for instance, with green and blue, they used to be the same word. Otskwi would refer to blue and green. And but just because that's just how we viewed it in Blackfoot. For instance, to kind of prove that, I know that the way that we'd say watermelon, which I assume kind of came from a while ago, you'd say the big blue plant, but you know, it's not blue, it's green. But in Blackfoot, utskwi refers to both blue and green. And had we viewed them as totally separate colors, we probably would have said something like a big green plant, but we just viewed blue and green as the same colors. But then English came in, and you know, you obviously don't view blue and green in same in English and Blackfoot. In English, you see them as two completely separate things, but in Blackfoot, they're more of the same thing. And so I think little changes like that, based off of like an English speaker's worldview, based on how their languages influenced a Blackfoot speaker's worldview to be more similar to English, And so I think that's kind of what initiated the change from High Blackfoot to modern Blackfoot, but also just because languages change over time.
Mhm.
I think had Blackfoot not been influenced by English, it would have sounded more similar to High Blackfoot and kind of less than modern Blackfoot. But even I don't really know much of Old Blackfoot, just a couple words.
Mhm. Here in like Kainai, if you will,
Uh,
like what I found interesting about like High Blackfoot versus Ika Olsen, if you will,
uh,
Low Blackfoot,
uh,
because if I were to say High Blackfoot,
hmm,
maybe kind of do a disservice to just use
uh,
modern without finding how to say High Blackfoot. But um, for greetings, you know how like Uki is kind of like what's up with
uh,
today's Blackfoot, but over the time with different elders or different political and ceremonial leaders, I've noticed they usually sometimes they say Ukya
okay.
when you're meeting like with significant leadership, like say like a chief or kind of like gods or spirits, if you will, like they say Okahe, which is kind of like a really interesting greeting, kind of like
Mm,
how you have like three different ways of saying hello.
uh, uh,
And like with the colors that you were mentioning, it was really interesting, like how like green and blue were the same compared to here, and like for Kainai, like violet, violet kind of slash green.
oh yeah, como no.
Ich como na pinyo, or
Uh,
like como no como noi not siwa.
como no hay nada. Sí.
Like it's just kind of interesting, like how like there's so many more I guess you could say like terminologies to kind of like differentiate green, but like from what Gamanoi, Gamanoi, not Siwa. It'll be interesting to break down like, okay, where is green versus where is violet? And
Mm,
because it would be kind of interesting to see like, okay, well, there's color mesh-ups.
mm,
But for like, I guess you could say like for, I find really interesting where like, the difference between like Auaki versus uh Aniska Siwa, like you kind of have like two different ways of saying like person that acts like a woman versus a
oh
person that
yeah.
and woman.
Aki kasi an awawaki.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's
As
what.
Awuaki, I would assume that I don't want to assume now I think about it, but it would be quite plausible Awuaki is kind of like high Blackfoot.
Uh, I would assume so, awawaki, because it really wouldn't make sense for it to have been made up in modern times. So it comes from the way that I believe that it comes from the way that our societies were back then. And I don't know much about it. And I think that's just because of colonialism that there's a lot of things that we don't know about. I mean, we have the basis of our culture, but there's still a lot of little things that
Mhm.
really nobody or very few people know about, and it's just not widespread. And one of those things is, awawaki, nakishikasi, even though they mean awawaki is kind of like a woman that awo, it's kind of a hard to, it's kind of like back and forth. So awawaki is like back and forth woman, and akishikasi is somebody that acts like a woman.
Mhm.
And of course, it is very plausible that they were, recent words as kind of like a really kind of like an offensive way to refer to LGBT, yeah, my necklace, LGBT net members, but I don't really see it being that way because it just doesn't really make sense in the modern ways of how we see
Mhm.
LGBT. So I think it tracks back to our ways and how I guess what we'd call them today is LGBT and how different So I think it's just terms from our old times that we, for describing those people, and then applying it to these new times. Because I think back then, everything was different with, gender roles and whatnot. And so I think that's where we can get, I could assume that Aki Ishkatsi would kind of be more so as describing a male that didn't go on, the war path with other men, but they rather followed the path of, or the roles of women. And so I think that's kind of more what to describe somebody like that.
Definitely.
But I think the way that we view gender and sexuality today is way different than how we did back then. I know they existed because we have the words for it, and it wouldn't make sense if these words just came out of nowhere. And so I know we had these, but I really don't know much about them. All I would assume is that it wasn't so much words to describe sexuality, but rather gender and gender roles. And so I guess more so transgender is the word that we'd call it today. But
the interesting thing about like how like gender roles like back then, Ninaki, for instance, like it kind of relates to like Bitamachka.
Oh yeah, Bitamachka.
For the audience, Bitamachka is running eagle, which is kind of like a well-known Blackfoot woman warrior, was well feared and well respected in the Blackfoot community. Ninaki means like, if you break it down, it's like man woman, but over the sequence of evolution with kinship, it's like leader woman or chief woman.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about the other day. Ninnawaki. I was thinking about that word. Funny that you mention it. And I realized that really ninna doesn't refer to a male, because the way that I know that is the word ninnaisin. And that sin in Blackfoot, it's making a verb into a noun. So ninnaisin, you would think means, because ninna is man, ninnaisin should be manhood, or just the state of being a man. But that's not what it refers to. When we say ninnaisin, it's referring to a coup or an act of bravery in war. And so I think ninna was more so meant to refer to somebody that went to war. That's why with bitomachkan, we refer to as ninnawaki. You could think of it as man, woman, but that's does a disservice to the language. Ninna, as you kind of really look at it and look at our culture, is more so somebody that goes to war. It's somebody that has those war honors. And so that's why ninnawaki makes sense. It's in a woman with those war honors and all the connotations that go with it. That's why we also call the Queen of England ninnawaki, because now ninna, since war isn't really that much part of our culture anymore, it's transformed into kind of saying a leader in some ways, in some respects. So I think that's how ninnawaki could also mean just a woman that's a leader, like the Queen. But yeah, it's really interesting when you really think about it and think about our language, how ninna is really more so referred to war honors and coup. And an elder was telling me about how Akana doesn't necessarily mean many chiefs, but it actually is saying many coup. And so I guess you could think of ninna. It's not really necessarily, it refers to men, but it not men because of the way that they're born, but rather just because of our culture as, just war and coup and whatnot. And so, but aki, I think aki is a really old word because we see it in other languages of, in our language family. Like, I believe in Ojibwe, they say ikwe, and then in Cree, they say iskwe. And so I don't really have any stories about the kind of what aki means. I'm sure it does mean something, but I think it's a really, really old word that we just don't really know what it means anymore. Because the thing about really old words, and this relates to High Blackfoot, is you can't really figure out what they mean on yourself. The etymology has to be passed down. With a lot of words in our language, you can figure it out what it means by yourself, because you could just look at the word and see. That's how I got ninnao, just because of ninnais and again now. But also, it's easy to see other things like sakkumapi. I can tell you're calling them a young person, or not literally. I'm not sure what the umapi means, but sak is young, so you're referring to them as young, and just other things like that. But aki, I'm not really able to tell. Shoot, there was but with old Blackfoot, high Blackfoot, or even older Blackfoot, older than high Blackfoot, it's really hard. The words that we have from them, it's really hard to tell what they mean. Like napi, I was told means white all over, and it referred to his hair, but it's such an old word you can't really see, what means what, except for api, which means white. And so there's just a lot of knowledge that has been lost about old Blackfoot. And so that's why I don't really know anything about the word woman and what it means and where it comes from, because we got it from really old Blackfoot. And same thing with napi. It's just been passed down, I think. And so we kind of, I think we lost the story or not the story. We still know that it means white all over, referring to his hair. We lost what, being able to break it down. We're not really able to break it down. We don't really see it anywhere. Like maybe the N in napi means like all over, but we don't use that anymore. But yeah, and I think it'd be the same for a lot of words that are just ancient, because like ochki for water, I'm not really sure about anything from it. But other words that because the way that I see it is the words for things are able to change a lot in Blackfoot because you're describing it. And so, I think words are able to change. That's how we got green, I'm pretty sure, fairly recently. But since the words change and we're using the rules of the modern Blackfoot, it's easy to see what they mean. Like ganiskina, even though I'm not able to break down each part of it, I know that it has ski in there, which is kind of like a vestige of old Blackfoot, which means face. And so you could assume that it's talking about them like rubbing their face. That's what I was told. And just different things like that. But I think the older words that didn't really ever change, aki, ochki, napi, or even i, neo, we're not really too sure, because they're just so old that the language that they spoke when these words came up is just fundamentally different than ours. Han.
For
my piece.
The with high Blackfoot, I would assume like it's always tied to like not just war, but also like ceremony too. Since like due to like we can agree that colonialism and globalization were kind of like a big factor that kind of like changed our cultural core to what we are right now. The thing about like ceremony too is like it's not always kind of reflected to like and but like there's other like I would like to call them esokinekikwex doctors. Like there used to be one ceremony that they was referred to as aikokakiwa, meaning kind of like crooked lodge or like small lodge. And like this is where like esokinekikwex and awua geeks, like they used to kind of like bring these this ceremony to life with like helping people reclaim like lost items of their own or talk to like a deceased relative. And it's unfortunate that Aikokakiwa is kind of like lost in kind of like our history, but it would be really cool to actually see like, okay, if this is like another sect of high Blackfoot, there's other cultural and ceremonial components. I don't want to, maybe that's a wrong word to say, but like concepts that were lost in translation, or let alone kind of like High Blackfoot, where the king's speech, if you will, quote unquote, has been passed on to with our generation. But it'll be really cool to actually kind of like look at more of like how each morphemes or like components of grammar are kind of like keenly related to or descended of High Blackfoot. So like, no, I think about it like acquired leaders, Ninamskakes, for instance. I would assume that one, that term right there, is kind of like used for like kind of like for acquired leaders, which is kind of like hierarchical kinships of Blackfoot society back then. Same thing with like Eohkimis, which are kind of like, is a term for like people that come from the water, or beaver bundle people. So like these are kind of like terms of like that were lost in, I won't say lost in translation, but due to globalization, we will kind of like have these kinship constructs that kind of like, I won't say lost in translation, but kind of like misplaced in translation of history. One thing that would be really cool to look into, or even like kind of bring some kind of influence, is for grammar, like how would you encompass like what today's lexicons, like how would you encompass like new words, like say like for instance we created like time travel. But I don't know, that'll be something to kind of look into. But that's kind of my pace. And
The only other thing that I've ever really been told about hype here, just talking with my mute on. The only other thing that I learned about High Blackfoot is that each word only referred to one thing, and that differs from today. Was, there's a lot of words that can refer to more than one thing. I can't really think of any example right now, but that's just another way. And I think Old Blackfoot, because you have to think, when Old Blackfoot was really spoken, all of the speakers, they only spoke Blackfoot. They didn't speak English. And so because of that, I think they just had more complex ways of describing things, and they were able to remember, all of these ways to speak, and they had all of these just very complex words that they used on the go. And then I think just when modern Blackfoot began being spoken, it's because, English, nowadays every Blackfoot speaker is bilingual, and it's kind of hard to speak two languages at a very advanced level. And so I think because English just imposed its way on their lives, essentially, and you kind of have to speak advanced English in order to get around in this world, I think they started to lose kind of their more advanced vocabulary, and then just started using more basic vocabulary because it's easier to speak. And like I think of some relatives of mine, even though he spoke Blackfoot at birth, he's a native speaker. He was taken into residential school when he was 6, and so he kind of lost a lot of his High Blackfoot, and a lot of his Blackfoot too, and he didn't get back until after residential school. But since he lost a lot of that High Blackfoot, he just speaks modern Blackfoot now. But his mother still speaks High Blackfoot because she was, more raised around that. And he was telling me that it's just really kind of complicated. They even had a different number base. And he said that sometimes he'll be talking to her and then she'll throw in a number from, kind of her time and how they used to do numbers, and it just throws him off. He doesn't understand it. But yeah, there's all I can really say about High Blackfoot and modern Blackfoot is speaking High Blackfoot is just kind of like speaking an entirely different language. But I would have to learn High Blackfoot to tell you how different it is, whether it's grammatically different or sounding different, or if it's just different terms. The way that I'd imagine it to be is, modern Blackfoot is kind of more like English, though English that everybody speaks, in, I guess you could say day-to-day life. And then High Blackfoot would be more comparable to academic English. If you're to ever read an academic paper, to do anything like that, it might sound like a foreign language to you with all you might not understand them fully. You could understand that it's English, but sometimes they might throw in a word that I don't know that word. And so I assume that's what it's like with High Blackfoot and modern Blackfoot, is just lots of different words for the same things. And yeah, that's all I can really say about High Blackfoot.
So basically, we're speaking layman terms.
Yeah, so we're just speaking kind of simple Blackfoot, I guess. Or not, I wouldn't say modern Blackfoot is simple. It's just, I guess, a little bit more simplified than High Blackfoot. Because which makes sense. I mean, just because some words can be so different from Blackfoot, from English, even now, there's some words that I'm gonna have trouble translating. And I assume in Higher Blackfoot, it would have been even harder to translate some of those words into English. But yeah.
It'd be really fun to actually kind of bring up for this next coming podcast, since maybe we have the opportunity to actually, my baby, since we have two different dialects, maybe we could kind of like do a little investigation of like what's our dialects on High Blackfoot, say for instance, like what's the difference between Kainai dialect of High Blackfoot versus Scotty Kainai.
Actually, I think they'd probably be the same, because I think also with modern Blackfoot that's where I think High Blackfoot is, I guess if you were to think about it, proto Blackfoot in a way, because if you think about it, High Blackfoot was spoken like in the time where we didn't really have that much influences from other languages. Everybody spoke Blackfoot. And so I don't think that dialects were really that much different, way back before the border, when everybody, when you could intermarry, or, I mean, you could intermarry now, but when people, went amongst other bands and clans and whatnot, I doubt that they really had much different dialect. Maybe, this one clan had a different word for this one thing than this other clan. But I'd imagine fundamentally they spoke exactly the same, and there wasn't really much of a difference like there is now. And so I think High Blackfoot would probably be like the Blackfoot that everybody spoke. And then once we were forced away from each other, with the border and then with their different reservations, I think that just that separation has led to the modern Blackfoot that we have now, and then the different dialects. But I think High Blackfoot would have probably been the same throughout. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I would assume. And plus, I don't really know of any High Blackfoot speakers down here. From what I know, Siksika has the most High Blackfoot speakers.
That's what I've been hearing about, like, because like here, like in my home nation, there is some speakers that know High Blackfoot. But like I always hear like Blackfoot elders say like, oh, ask Siksika, it still kind of exists. So it'd be actually kind of cool to actually get like a scat going on the podcast and see like, okay, it's kind of compare and contrast of like what's the difference between
which Now that I think about it, I just thought of it. I remember every other dialect that I speak to, they kind of say that Siksika is like the strangest. And now that I think of it, it's probably because they just have more high Blackfoot in their day-to-day life that we just don't recognize. Because every now and then they'll say a word that I just don't, I'm just like, huh? Like I remember, I think their word for west is Satuchtsi. And when I first heard that, I didn't know what that meant. So it probably came from from high Blackfoot. But so that would be good. Go find someone from Siksika. Tell them to
Even wait, say that one more time.
Huh?
Like west.
Satuchtsi.
So neat don't see here in Kainai. Interesting.
Is that how you say west in Ghana?
Mm-hmm.
Here we say Amiturtsi. But it kind of makes sense because Amiturtsi means in the direction of the mountains. And so Ghana probably, when the word for west was that you guys have now, when it was popularized, you probably weren't really like by the mountains. And so I think directions is another thing that's interesting in Blackfoot. The way that I know them is Binapochts for east, but I also Binapochts. There's another word that you could say for Binapochts that translates to in the front. And it's interesting because I don't know, just all of the directions are interesting. But Binapochts, I believe, actually I'm not sure about Binapochts. It's the only one that I'm not really sure about. But Skapochts, I believe means like upstream or something like that. And then Abatsochts, north, means behind, the direction that's behind. And then Amitochts down here refers to the mountains, the direction of the mountains, which makes sense because, all along the reservation, there's just like mountains directly west of us. Like there's no place that you could be on the reservation that west isn't just like full of mountains. But when I went to Ghana, there's still mountains, but there's places that you can go where there's like west and you don't really see mountains. And then in Siksika, I'm not really sure of the geography, but whenever I'd go to Calgary and then pass around that area, you didn't really see many mountains to the west. And so maybe that's why we say Amitochts, but the other dialects don't really say that. And then
lucky ones with the mountains.
And then directions are another thing that's interesting amongst the. But what I found interesting when I found out that Abatsochts means like the direction that's behind is the way that we just view it, because, and that's another way that it's not a way that English has influenced Blackfoot because we kept that, but it's a way that it could have, because, when you think in English and really, or just really in a European mind style, north is up, that's kind of like, it's just up, on all of the maps, it's up. It doesn't have to be, that's just kind of how they viewed it. That's their worldview. But in Blackfoot, it's like behind, and, but in, when I grew up thinking about north, you think of it as like, oh, that's kind of like up. But in Blackfoot, oh, well, that's down. That's behind you. And so like we're kind of like facing south. If you, I know it kind of doesn't make sense, but that's just, hopefully you can understand what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
We made maps, they'd have the south kind of pointing up. But yeah, directions are interesting. Directions in high Blackfoot are probably also really different, or they probably were ever changing, is what I'd assume. Just wherever you were, because it really would make sense to say Amitochts if you were, out of sight of the mountains, or even if you did go west past the mountains, then you can't really say, oh, it's on the mountainside, because there's no mountains once you're like out of the mountains. So whenever we went on, so in Warwade, war, or no, not war, but back then they probably just had different words for all of the directions depending on where they were. Like if they were to go on a war raid, you know, maybe on the Kootenay or the Salish, it wouldn't make sense for them to say Amidots because they're like past the mountains. And that was so even in their wartime when they'd go past the mountains, they probably just used a different word for west, you know, maybe they're like saying, oh, Takamito, I'm going west. But then once they're like past west, they probably, if they keep going west, they probably would have said something else. But I don't know. In Blackfoot's very interesting because I think the reason that there's so many different ways to say one thing in different dialects is because it's not like going to ever be the same, the thing. And so the language changes to reflect that. And then I think just sometime in the past 100 years, we quit really changing words often. And then we just kept the ones that we knew based on, you know, where we were.
Makes me think like with cardinal directions, it's not so simple of like just saying west, but
Yeah.
like due to like the geography influences like the language, how we see cardinal directions differently compared to other languages.
Yeah. Yeah. You say,
It'd be
yeah.
kind
You
of
said,
to see like, well, maybe it'll be interesting to find out like how do you say west in the plains region, you know?
yeah. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. How would you say west if you're in the plains? If you're here, if you were there, it'd probably change, you know, wherever you were.
Mhm.
And yeah. And I think that's a thing that we kind of lost in, you know, modern Blackfoot because we're more stationary now. And so
Where even like with smallpox and globalization and just downright just bad, yucky history that we
yeah,
but
yeah, Blackfoot is really interesting in that way that of just how much it really changed. And mm, I think that's what also kind of makes it confusing for us dialects to just understand each other because I think the language was always changing because, you know, it being a language based on verbs and us always moving, you know, we just saw movement all the time. And so our language moved with the movement, I guess you could say. And then I think when we stopped moving, when we just kind of had to hunker down in one place for good, I think it just made the language very complicated because it just no longer changed and then just made it harder to talk to other people,
even
you know,
little
speakers of the language. And down here, the reservation is very large. And so all of our communities are far together. And so what I heard back then, they barely really went to other communities because you had to go on wagon. I remember my my grandma, she's only about 80 something. She told me about how back in the day, whenever they'd want to visit their relatives in Heart Butte, they had to take the wagon for like 12 days just to get down there. And so what I heard is that all of the communities kind of had a different dialect, which makes sense because if you're, you know, way off in the plains, you're going to have different words for something than if you're in the mountains. And plus all that, or, you know, just the way that you describe something, but also just because, or what I'm trying to say is just since the language is changing, you know, they came up with their own words, but since they weren't able to interact with each other as much because they're all over, they weren't able to keep up with the changes. And so I think a lot of dialects, even on the reservation, exist, but since we have so few speakers and Amskapi Pikani, that's just something that we lost. I don't know what the most popular dialect here, but like kind of rose to power, I guess you could say. Not rose to power, but we are like standardized Amskapi Pikani dialect. I'm not sure where it came from. Probably came from like Browning. But yeah, I remember hearing that all of the places, all of the communities used to speak a different type of Blackfoot. And Like, I know the only instance that I could give you, because it's just something that we lost with, all of our speakers almost gone, is that in the Natugyukasi, to medicine dialect, instead of saying it's eat boys, and they'd say eat boys, and which is a way to say like the language, they called it eat boys. And so just like different grammatical changes like that just went all over. But yeah. And I think for that reason, because I believe you and I both said, it might have been just me, but everybody speaks Blackfoot a little bit differently. If you've ever noticed it, everybody kind of has their own take on it. They might pronounce their words a little bit differently. And I think it's just because of all of those dialects, mini dialects that just like popped up, when, we had different communities. And so I think that's the reason that we have, that everybody just speaks a little bit differently.
Oh, that's so true. Exactly. Like when I was here, like when I was helping with like some of the Blackfoot teachers on like trying to spell like Blackfoot, since most of them they didn't know how to spell or read, kind of like Donald Francis dictionary. I heard like well, since most of the workers at the time I was interacting with, they said the same word but in a different context. So like say for instance like what's wrong or what's up, like "Tsakidekis" versus "Tsakidekispa" versus "Tsakidekispa." Like, so I kind of heard like different accent points and I guess you could say emphasis of like stress on.
Yeah, you could think of that. Like, yeah, I've heard so many different ways to say "Kidekishpa." I've heard "Kidekisp," "Kidekishpa," or "Kidekisp," but just a lot of different things. Like, I think the first time that I noticed this was with the word, I'm joking, "Deksan." The way that I learned it from my grandma. She's not my grandma, my kind of language teacher. I just called her grandma. She'd say "Deksan," but then I learned from this guy, or I heard this guy in Ghana, he'd say "Daksan." So like little like things like that, I think is why our language is so different and why is it sometimes hard to understand. Just vowel changes. I think "Deksan" versus "Daksan," or "Asiksikimi" versus "Asiksikimi," or "Gidakishp" versus "Gidakishpa."
Versus "naha" from "nah." Ah.
Oh yeah, nah, or yeah, just things like that. I had another example, but or like the gutturals, ach. Some people pronounce them really strongly, ach, and some people are just like ach. Like I remember, I hear a lot of like with the word omak. A lot of people say omak or omak, just for. But there's like a lot of. Another thing that I notice is different with each speaker's ish, the aspirate. Some people pronounce it is, like istoch bomop for money, or estate boyop, a phone. But other people say ishte boyop. Some people make it kind of like ichte boyop. And so I think it just, but these changes from also another thing that I was told about these changes is that a lot of it was just each family just kind of had a different way to say it. Like Nitsksanip is kind of like the standardized ways to say I don't know, but I've also heard Nitstanip with two TS sounds, Nitstanip. And some people say Sitsanatsi instead of Siksanatsi, which is kind of like the standardized way for it. But yeah, I think that's really all I could.
It'll be interesting to kind of like maybe for next podcast, like be kind of interesting, like say like we go to like our communities and interact with like community members compared to how this guy from Moses Lake, if you will, said this Blackfoot versus the person from Standoff, like said it this way compared to like Heartview and Browning.
Yeah.
Or East Glacier. I don't think there's East Glacier, is there any Blackfoot speakers there? Or
we don't really have. They might. They probably do. Blackfeet speakers down here is it's really funny. You always find somebody that's like fluent that nobody else like knows about it. They just like kind of. I remember me and my friend were at Okan last year, and we were sitting in our society teepee. Ki Mom kinna ito do. He comes in. Ki ito ki nitokes is so yeah or no. Nitokes is so and he visits us. He just speaks fluent Blackfeet, and we just like nobody really like knows him as a speaker. He just kind of like we described him. We were just like, yeah, he's just another like fluent speaker that just like comes out of nowhere. And so there probably is a speaker in East Glacier, but not one that I know about. But there's probably just somebody that'll pop up. But yeah. And just for an example of one of these words that I know is different, I know it from because my family on my father's side, or my father's side, is from Heart Butte. And my father, Ninna, Inchkachka, Nachsenan, he was named by a grandfather. His name, Matsknib, I don't know his Indian name. Anistai Billy Goat. We called him Billy Goat Running Crane, and he was a kind of an old timer. I believe he was about 90 years old when he died in 2003. And the way that he named my father was Little Rider, and he called him Inaksim. But that's the only instance that I've heard of Siminami as like rider, or even it probably is Iminami. And so that's just like an example. It's probably it could be from High Blackfoot, but it could also just be like a Heart Butte thing, because the way that you'd say Little Rider now, you'd probably say more so nakohkitopi or pokohkitopi. And so, yeah, that's something that we could do, is just go around asking them if they know any words that are just different from kind of like the standard Blackfoot, like iminami instead of ohkitopi. Just stuff like that. Or ipoisin instead of nitsi poisin. But
it would be really interesting too to kind of like once we kind of like do our little investigation for our next podcast. Like maybe we could present like how accent pitches are emphasized in certain positions of the Blackfoot word.
Oh yeah, different kind of different emphasis.
Yeah.
Let me think of. Can I think? I'd have to think.
Like Takidakis versus Takidakis versus Takidakis.
That'd be interesting. Just kind of going over different vowel sounds, which I've noticed a couple, but I could save it for next one. But anyway, maybe we could start wrapping it up, huh?
Yeah, like this girl out.
Kita matsen ki kistuwa kita matsen sa tohpoa. I'll talk to you all later.